Yes. Well, how did you first meet Paul Smoker?
Well, I first met him, and hopefully he doesn't remember this. I think it was the day before I auditioned for Nazareth College in early 2000, and he happened to be playing a show at the old Bop Shop with probably, I could probably figure this out if I looked it up, but Ken Filiano, the saxophonist Bob Magnuson,
Mm-hmm.
and and the drummer Lou Grassi. And they that was probably in the days when Tom would bring, I mean, this also becomes a history of the bop shop, right? Like a lot of the bands that would be recording at Cadence Records or for creative improvised music projects up in Redwood, the day or so before they would come to Rochester, come to the bop shop and play their material, which in some cases was the first time that the band would get together. Um, so I'm pretty sure it was in the context of preparing for that recording. Um, so I heard him. I sort of knew about him by reputation, and that it was an enticement that he had worked with Anthony Braxton. Um, and I was interested in Nazareth partly because of his association with the place, although he wasn't teaching there yet. But then also about I had seen Beverly Smoker's recital um, back in the November before and was like pretty had my mind blown. Um, so wanted to study with her and was hoping that I could get some time with Paul too. So went out to hear him and probably said something silly as a high school student after the concert. And yeah, so and then yeah, he didn't teach there my first semester. And then sort of somehow it turned out that the guy who'd been sort of, well, Tim Sullivan, who passed away just over a year ago, who'd been um, heading the jazz band there for a long time, was sort of beginning the process of his retirement, and um, and it seemed like the next person to take it over was Paul, and so Paul started that and started the combo, um, which may or may not have started that semester, but yeah, I mean he started bringing in all kinds of interesting charts. I started taking lessons with him. Maybe that's my second semester, his first teaching there regularly. So that was the beginning.
If you don't mind, what year was that?
That was I was thinking that would come up. So that was 2000, the winter of 2001, the beginning of 2001.
Well, do you have any idea what you said to Paul when you met him? And then, that's the other thing. There's so many I'm sure there's so many moments or past moments of high schoolers who are too nervous to say something to the guest artist, or they don't say something to the guest
Right.
artist. But I mean, what about his performance inspired you to go up and say something? What was kind of your impression
Yeah.
of him after you had learned about his reputation and you knew him? What was that
Yeah.
first impression?
Yeah, I mean, sort of relaxed but intimidating. I mean, it was I don't know. I think I might have even told him that I was going to audition tomorrow, but it I don't have a lot of recollection of it, but I just remember it was, it was yeah, it was quite a concert, and and the records that came from it are quite good too. Um
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of
Well, so,
kind of what I got there.
so I mean, you basically started at Nazareth before him, which is kind of a funny thought. But
Hmm.
once you talked about those interesting charts, and I think that's the other thing that I'm learning through these interviews and talking with people is that they say you would take lessons, but no one else I've talked to has been a trumpet player, but they're still taking lessons with Paul. And so for you as a
Yeah.
pianist, what were those lessons like?
Oh man. So it was 98%, like, well, I shouldn't say 98%. It was a lot of playing standards and talking about music. Um, yeah, it was. I mean, sometimes he would assign me tunes to learn. Sometimes I just have to read a tune in the lesson. Um, Oftentimes it was like, "What are you working on this week?" Um, I was kind of taking care of theory on my own. I was a theory major, in fact, although that wasn't so much, didn't have so much to do with the jazz side of things. And sometimes I would bring in stuff I was writing. But yeah, it was frequently either playing by myself or playing duo.
Yeah.
Um, and which is a really good way, I think, and this is giving me an opportunity to reflect on this for my own teaching. Um, it's one thing to sort of have your student play their whatever and then you criticize it. It's another thing to like actually get in there and play with the student and you're sort of dealing with each other as professional musicians in a sense. As if this was a gig and he had hired me for the gig and except it's also the situation where he's going to give me feedback and like, well, hey, thanks for doing the gig, but before the next one, you might want to work on this. You might want to, for me, one of the big ones was getting lost in the form.
Hmm.
Like on an AABA tune, I play three A's before I get to the bridge, and then an A, and then I would play one A at the beginning, and then before I get to the bridge, or whatever. I mean, that was a, that I think I didn't really lick that problem in college. It took sort of a while. And I feel like I'm pretty secure in that now. A lot of it is, and because I remember, I was thinking about this the other night too, that I remember a lot of those times that I got lost, it was because I had second guessed myself. It's like, yeah, yeah, the bridge is coming. No, wait, I don't think it's the bridge. Like, shit, it was supposed to be the bridge. Um, so yeah, so I mean that's some of the process is maybe for any teacher and student is the student to listen to well what's actually going on and listen to themselves in a way.
So from, you now teach, you do all these gigs, and I want to focus on the teaching for a moment because it's fresher in our minds. I mean, you brought up that one example which really established that peer-to-peer relationship between, a student and his teacher. Uh, and we've known this interview has been coming up for a little bit, and obviously we know Celebrating Smoker is going to be soon as well. Are there any things, in addition to that, cultivating the peer-to-peer relationship that you remember from your time when Paul was teaching you that you're bringing into your own lessons or working with your own students?
That's interesting. I mean, at the moment, the context is a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm teaching private piano lessons again now, which I had not done for most of the time that I was in the South. Um, I was teaching more classroom things in high school and colleges. Um, yeah, I mean, I have a couple of jazz students, and I'm trying to make sure that some of the lesson is playing together. But there are certainly, these are kids who are really, yeah, they need to develop also some facility on the instrument in a way that's a little different than let's play duets.
Yeah.
Um, but maybe now that we're talking about it, maybe I need to find some more creative ways to do that. I mean, I'm trying to make sure we do some of it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a little different with kids and adults. And um, I mean, certainly one other thing back when I lived here before and I was teaching in a college and piano lessons was part of what I did there. Um, is trying to get students to listen to great jazz musicians. I mean, Paul particularly, well, I started studying with him in the cassette tape era, at
Hmm.
the end of the cassette tape era, and I still somewhere, I should have gotten some out, um, have several of the cassette tapes that he dubbed for me the first semester or so. I was like, hey, you need to, hey, you really haven't checked out Chick Corea? Now he sings, now he sobs. I'm going to make you a tape. You haven't checked out Circle with Anthony Braxton. You haven't listened to Bill Evans live in Montreux. Okay. So he made tapes of those. And then after the first or so year, um, he got a CD burner. Um, and he would type up the title and the track names and the recording date and all the musicians and print it out, and there would be a little insert in the jewel case uh, with the relevant information. Um, so I think eventually he moved on to playlists, or sharing something on a streaming service. Uh, so yeah, when I was teaching college and teaching one-on-one lessons, I was doing that more.
Yeah. Did you ever have the opportunity to share a gig with him as well? And if so, talk to me about some of those. What do you remember really? I mean, we
Yeah,
talked about that peer-to-peer relationship before, but if you had gigs with him, that's really a peer-to-peer relationship. So what were those gigs like with Paul?
right. Well, let's see. I mean, he hired me actually to play on his faculty recital. It was trio. It was him and me and Tim Sullivan. My, I think it must have been my junior year, the beginning of my junior year, and it was a program of standards and mostly playing down the middle. Yeah, I'm trying to. There's were a couple times that he called on me to play. One of them was for a Rochester morning show, and yeah, I mean we played a few standards, and then we also played a free tune, where we just kind of went nuts. This was like Thanksgiving week or so or maybe early Christmas break of my junior year or something. And so on like fairly pedestrian, I had to like get there at 4 a.m. or something. Um, and yeah, we played a couple things that were down the middle, and then we also played one that was just totally bananas. And I can't imagine what they all would have thought of that. Oh, we also played the ballad. That's right, because I we showed it to my grandmother, and when we got to the free piece, she said, "I hate that." But then we also played this beautiful ballad that Paul had written, called Beverly, dedicated to his wife Beverly. And my grandmother's name was also Beverly, so she liked that one.
I I I just find this especially funny because I know what it's like on both sides of the equation, being the musician and being the TV person, and just for I could say for that person that happened in slow motion because oh, this is just nice jazz, and all of a sudden I don't know what's happening. I can't
Right.
stay middle. Well, and that actually serves as a springboard on something that I did want to ask about, because a lot of the education you've talked about and the couple gigs he hired you for, they were standards. That's not a lot of what you do now, and that's some of it, but you're known for a lot of the creative and improvisational new music, and of course that's also what Paul was known for too. And so
Yeah.
did that your relationship with that kind of creative improvisational music start with Paul, and that was something that you guys kind of grew and developed?
No, I was into so my very first jazz album that I ever bought was Expectations by Keith Jarrett,
Whoa.
the one album that he did for Columbia, which has from 1972, and so if you're familiar, 72 or so, um, if you're familiar with Keith's development, that's sort of in the time that things were. I mean, he was really blending a lot of things, um, from free jazz, country, gospel, more straight ahead jazz. That's all present in that album, and it was really mind blowing. And then from there, I read the liner notes, and they talk about Bill Evans, they talk about Ornette Coleman, and so on and so forth. And I also, of course, check out John Coltrane, and who obviously had quite a swath of styles in his career. So no, even in high school, I was definitely getting into, I would go frequently to the bop shop to hear, maybe I heard Paul just once when I was in high school, but Sabir Mateen, Ken Vandermark, um, Brad Shepik, those are the ones that stick out in my memory. Um, from that period. So I was definitely into all of that early on. And so Paul's influence, it certainly hit a number of areas, but one of them was sort of reconciling that out experimental thing and the inside thing. That I mean, one of the things that he pointed out early to me was, on a number of recordings, particularly the band Circle with Anthony Braxton, Chick Corea, Dave Holland, Barry Altschul, that they play this long version of Nefertiti, the Wayne Shorter tune, that sounds, if you just drop the needle in the middle, it sounds like total free improvisation. They're playing on the tune the whole way. They're playing choruses.
Hmm.
Um, and so much of this music that I had previously sort of been listening to, and it's like, oh man, that's really wild, and everybody's just like going nuts. I mean, yeah, there is that, but they're also doing it within the context of playing a tune, um, which often, although not always, involves keeping the form and the harmonic structure of the tune, keeping it in your mind, in your ear, and relating to it, even if you're a million miles away in what you're actually playing. And some with Paul and some with some other people, hearing Paul with other people, playing with Paul, and in my own stuff, there have been some amazing moments where I just think everybody is totally gone, but I know where we are in the tune, and I'm trusting that everybody else knows. And then suddenly everything snaps back into place, and we're like back at the top of the form. Um, I've been in the audience for, I can think of one time with, it was Paul, the bassist, Tony Marino, and Phil Haynes. They were playing, I think they were playing Fables of Faubus,
Woo.
and they had just gone totally berserk. I may have even lost track of where it was. And then, like, suddenly, bam, right back to, to a medium or medium slow swing.
The other thing I wanted to ask about too, when it comes to Paul's playing, the sound. I know that you are, a piano guy and not necessarily a horn guy. What was
Mhm.
that sound like sharing the bandstand with him or checking him out at the bop shop or listening to those recordings? How do you reflect on his sound?
Yeah, I don't know. So warm and full is sort of the basic, but certainly could be bright, certainly could be super understated. But yeah, if I could think of sort of what, all else being equal, he just puts the horn up to his lips to play something. Yeah, it was really warm and gentle, I would even say.
Hmm.
I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah. What Paul was also known as a character. You spent obviously a handful of years
Yeah.
uh you know as him as your teacher and sharing the bandstand and being in a lot of the same concentric circles. Any
Mhm.
moments of his personality shining through that you can recall?
Well, there's the one classic story. Um, So in the probably the beginning of my junior year, he asked me and Jonathan Serrano, who was a saxophonist playing with us at the time, another student, to each arrange a tune, a Wayne Shorter tune for the jazz combo, which had sort of, I don't know, three or four horns. So there was some meat there to like arrange for. And so I had to arrange Night Dreamer. Um, and so like, I went to work on it and I put in um, all of my craziest ideas. Like I want to do this, and then I want to do this, and I want to do that. And I brought it to the band the next rehearsal, and it isn't going well. Um, and at a certain point, Paul this walks up and says, "They don't pay me enough to listen to that."
Oh no.
Yeah. Um,
Oh my God.
yeah. And there were a number of problems with it looking back, like including it was probably pretty hard to read. It may have been handwritten, but I think even that wasn't the only problem. Um, and I do think that even if they had like read it absolutely as written, it wouldn't have sounded very good and probably would have sounded bad. So that, he could deliver some pretty biting comments as a teacher. But then the next day was my improv lesson with him. And so overnight, he had made me a CD of Bill Holman's arrangements for the Stan Kenton Orchestra.
Yeah.
And he said, if you want to arrange for ensembles, you need to listen to this. And he also gave me some technical ideas of like, this is what you need to do so that people can have a chance of playing your music. Um, Both in terms of the way you write it down and the kinds of things that you write. And we went over some ideas, and yeah, so any sort of ego crushing moment, of which there were many, was also balanced out by like a lot of genuine care and generosity.
Yeah. Uh, that covered almost everything I wanted to ask about. This is kind of a two-parter. The
Yeah.
show is coming up, at the time of us recording this, just under a month away.
Mhm.
Um, so talk to me about looking forward to the show, and then anything else that's on your mind about Paul as we wrap up this interview.
Gosh. Yeah, I mean, looking back, yeah, he was very generous to me and a lot of other students, worked really hard and also made a lot of great recordings. Like, you're in the jazz radio business and the jazz record business, and I'm sure that you are aware that there are like a million amazing players
Yeah.
that nobody's ever heard of. And yeah, a bunch of people have heard of Paul, but he's not exactly a household name. Um, and yeah, there are so many great musicians everywhere that just aren't, or he sort of had a moment in the 80s where there was some notoriety around him. Um, but yeah, just, an amazing recorded legacy. If anyone can splurge on the Anthony Braxton box set that came out a couple of years ago, doing all the Charlie Parker tunes,
Yeah.
um, that's a pretty wonderful testament to all the sides of his playing, um, and of course his own recordings that are pretty great. I've had a lot of deep moments listening to those.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Michael, I really appreciate your time. It
Yeah,
was,
thanks for asking.
oh yeah, it is